Hello to everyone. I have added a couple of scale games and I want to make a review of them just to have some place on the internet where I can send people to show how it works and how to configure them. There is already a video where I review all of these games and all the settings for them, and you can find that video here by tapping on the question mark, but that video is older and it doesn't have all the new games. You can see here there are 8 games, but actually there are 4. And each game type has one for notes and one for intervals. And I think eventually I will just merge them together and we'll add a toggle to switch between notes and intervals on the fly. The first 2 games are present in that older video, but they have some settings changed. The point of these games is to fill in notes or intervals on the area that you select. You can select any area, so you can increase it or decrease it. And you have to fill in all the notes of a scale on this area of the fretboard. Previously, there was 2 pickers here, one for keys and one for one scale. So you could select one single key or multiple keys, and you could select only one scale. And once you fill in the area, it would switch to the different key if you have multiple keys. And that was replaced with this picker, which is much more flexible, where you can select a couple of keys here and a couple of scales. And these 2 rows will combine, so you will get C major, C minor, D major, D minor. Also, you can add a 3rd row where you add key scale pairs. You can select, for example, A Lydian or E Phrygian. And this 3rd row of scales will add to this combination. So with this selection, you will be playing with 6 different key scale pairs. And once you fill in one, it will switch randomly to another one and so on. And this is better this way because you can now do things like, for example, if you learn modes, you can select one key here, C, and then you can select here different modes relative to this one key, and it will switch. So you fill in C major scale, then it will switch to C Lydian, and you can see the differences between different modes. Also, you can practice one scale with several keys here, if you want to just see how this scale is looking at different locations on the fretboard pretty much. And you can remove all of this and only use the last row, where you can select a couple of scales that you want to train, and it will train only those scales. So pretty much just the list of different key scale pairs. Another setting that was added for all of these scale games, not just to the first 2, is this highlight scale root node, where it just highlights the root node with different color. It highlights with darker green color. If this is disabled, you will see all nodes to have the same color. The next 2 games here are the same as previous ones, except that now you have to fill in nodes or intervals one by one. And let's start it. It asks you to fill all the E notes across this area, then all the B notes, and so on until you fill in all this scale silhouette. You can disable the silhouette here in the settings, and it will make the fretboard clear, and you will not have any guide on where these notes are, but you can still fill in all the notes within this empty area. Same principle for the intervals. It's just instead of notes you will see intervals here. Moving forward, we get these shape games. These are about your shapes that you probably already know about, because whenever you learn any scales you probably are being presented with these shapes to learn, especially for pentatonic scales, because these shapes are very useful to know when you learn pentatonic scales. First I will show the games, and then I'll get back to the shapes to explain more about the naming system and the rest. So here we have E minor pentatonic selected to play this game, and it will ask you to fill in some notes of the position. So for position 4 we have to fill in the position 4 shape. Once you do that, it will switch to position 1, like not 1, but it is randomly switching, and so on. Once it fills all these positions, it will switch to the next scale if you selected multiple scales. For major and minor pentatonic, you have these 5 positions, 5 boxes, because usually for pentatonic scales these are called boxes, but I follow the positions naming, so everything is positioned now. And these 5 shapes are the exact same shapes that can be used for major pentatonic as well, except that in major pentatonic the root note is going to be at a different place. For example, here in this shape you have the root note here. If you switch to a major pentatonic, the root note for this shape, this same shape, is going to be here. But you can reuse these 5 shapes. The same goes for all these major scale modes. Because modes share all the same notes, they can share all the same shapes. There are 5 shapes here. These are the same shapes as for pentatonic scales, except that they have more notes, because diatonic scales obviously have 7 notes and they have 2 more notes than pentatonic scales. And you can see it here if I overlay the pentatonic scale. So we have major scale and pentatonic scale overlaid on top of it. And you can see here this shape, and you are familiar with this shape, but now this shape has 2 more notes here for diatonic scales. Again, as with the pentatonic scales, different modes will have the root note in different locations within these shapes. The naming system here follows the rule that the position 1 is going to be the shape that always has the root note at the lowest string as to the left as possible. And let's actually select some familiar shapes. So this one, you can see here that the position 2 for major scale is this one. But for example, Mixolydian, the position 2 is a different shape. And for Lydian, it's going to be, again, position 2 is going to be at a different shape. Same goes for position 1. So the point here is that for different scales, the name position 1 is going to be a different shape. And you have to know that if you train for major scales, the position 1 is this shape. But if you train for minor scales, the position 1 is this one. So the numbers here changed based on the scale, unlike CAGED, but I will talk about CAGED later. Also, the rule is that the position 2 always goes after the position 1. Actually, let's look with there. So position 2 always goes after the first one, position 3rd after the 2nd, and so on. And it all goes in the cycle like this. And because I added these shape games, I have renamed all of the patterns to follow this position system. Even 3 notes per string now follow the position system. Previously it was 3 in PS1, 3 in PS2, but it didn't follow any rules, like that position 1 has to be with the root note on the lowest string. And this was renamed for all the tunings that are supported that have some patterns in them, like standard tunings for bass here, for ukulele, for 6 and 7 string guitar. Only these 5 tunings have some patterns in them because they are added manually and I cannot cover all the different tunings. But these tunings have renamed positions. And this was done because user insisted very much on adding not just CAGED games, because initially there was CAGED games added, and CAGED games have a different naming system, but user wanted the positions naming system, so these games are the same except the naming is different, and I will review it later. But thankful to that, all the patterns are now named by the position naming system instead of CAGED, because previously it was CAGED name system. And CAGED is not as useful as position naming system, so that's for the good. And finally we get to CAGED games, which are the same games as these two. They work with the same shapes, except that the naming of those shapes will be done based on the CAGED system. And these two games have more settings because CAGED system in general is a bit more complex. First I have to explain what CAGED is. So when you learn guitar you probably learned these major open chords, which is E major, A major, D major. Everybody knows these chords because this is the first chords that people learn. And the same for minor. So D minor, A minor, and so on. And you have these 5 shapes. Within each shape, you can find the open chord shape. For example, in this shape, you can find the open chord E major open chord and D minor open chord. Each shape gets its name within the CAGED system based on the open chord that you can find within that shape. There is major-based CAGED system which names these 5 shapes based on major open chords, and there is minor-based CAGED system which names it based on minor open chords. The point of CAGED system is that first these shapes follow the abbreviations. So first shape is C, the next shape is A, so C, A, the next shape is going to be G shape, and so on. Unlike position system, the C shape is the same for every mode. So you get this C shape, you can remember it. If I switch to Mixolydian and select C shape, this is going to be the same exact shape, but the position number is different. That is good because when you play CAGED games, you can realize that once you learn the C shape, no matter which scale you select and no matter which scale you play that game with, the C shape is the same. As the point of CAGED system is that, for example, for major scale, you can find the home chord everywhere on the fretboard. And let's look at this. First, major-based CAGED system. We are looking at major-based CAGED system because major-based CAGED system works for major scale and for major pentatonic scale. And minor-based CAGED system works for minor scale and minor pentatonic scale, and that's it. It doesn't work for any other modes, and I will show it later. So you look at the E shape, and this E shape has E open, E major open chord in it. This is the E major open chord. And this E major open chord holds the home chord of major scale. So we have E major scale and the home chord is A major chord. And you can see here that within this shape you have A major open chord. And this is valid for every shape. If you switch now to this shape, which is the D shape, and if you look at the D open chord shape, you can see that this shape also holds A major chord. And let's do one more. So if you select C shape and highlight the C shape open chord notes, you can see that this holds again A major chord. Once you know where each shape and its name and where that open chord is within the shape, you can find the open chord no matter where you are on the fretboard. For the minor scale and minor pentatonic, and let's look at minor pentatonic now, you should use minor-based CAGED system, and let's look at this E minor. You can select here E minor open chord, and it holds A minor chord. I will highlight it here. So it holds A minor chord. Then we can go to any other shape. Let's select C minor. And in this C minor, we can highlight this C minor open chord shape. And it again holds A minor chord. If you start looking at modes like Phrygian, for example, you can see that for Phrygian, which is the minor scale because flat third here, and the home chord is A minor. But if you look at the shape, so let's look even a minor-based CAGED. So this is the A minor open chord. This is the A minor open chord. And within this chord, you don't get A minor chord. You get, what was that? Phrygian, you get D minor chord. So even though this chord is within the Phrygian, but it is useless because this is not the home chord. And for every shape, you will get this D minor chord. So let's select E minor shape, and select this E minor shape here, you again get D minor chord within this shape. It is just one of the chords, and for different modes that's going to be a different chord. This one is the fourth chord within the Phrygian, but if you select, for example, A Lydian and look at the chords that are within these CAGED shapes, they will be maybe fifth chord or second chord or sixth chord and so on. So this isn't going to be the home chord. That's why I'm saying the CAGED system is not as useful if you go outside of major minor scale and major minor pentatonic scale. Let's go to the game now. In this game you can select here, let me restore some settings here. Okay, so you have major based CAGED system, you select these scales to play with. For major pentatonic and diatonic you should select major based, and here you can select which shapes you want to train on. For minor scale and minor pentatonic scale you can select minor based, and these are shapes that you can select to play. You can select both separately, and it will randomly shuffle these 10 shapes and will ask you one time C shape and one time A minor shape, even though these shapes are the same. And you have both combined, where it combines these names for the same shape and it will ask you with this combined name. Let's select here C major scale, major based, and the game asks you to find the C shape, and you have to fill in C shape. And once you do that, it will switch to the next shape and so on. For minor based, these shapes, and for both separately, I already told you. And there is this parameter here where it shows you the open chords within the shape. If you enable it, and let me actually change some parameters so that we could see the shape. Let's select C major, major based, these shapes. For C shape, in it you have C open chord shape, and it is now highlighted by the border here. For G shape you get this open chord shape in it, and it is highlighted as well. Same for minor based, same for both separately, because it is separately shapes, and same for both. Actually, for both combined, you will not get the highlight of the open chords, because I don't want to overlay two chords on top of one shape here. So even though I add here the selection for all of these modes, for CAGED it doesn't matter, it doesn't make sense to train a major based or minor based system on top of these modes that are not major scale or minor scale, because it will be useless. But the option is there, so you can play with it. And that is it for this CAGED games. But since I am recording this video, let's go over a couple of more features, just to have the review of them here. But these are not related to scale games. So the first one here is that initially you could add these favorite scales that you use the most, and you would get the arrows that you can use to quickly switch between scales without going into this page. Now you can go long press on the fretboard and go to favorite keys and scales, and here you can add a couple of keys that you use the most, and you get arrows for that too. Also you can add here key scale pairs. For example, let's say you use C major scale, the most common, and E minor, and you can switch the whole key scale pair at once. Because there are a lot of arrows here, this area becomes small, so I wouldn't advise to use them both, and you can control which arrows you want to see by these toggles. So you can disable these two and leave only key scale pairs switch, or you can disable key scale pairs switch and enable only keys and scales here. This was done by a user request as well. Another change that was done is to the metronome. There is no visual changes here, but it was rebuilt to use audio streaming instead of timers, because Android and iOS are not real-time systems, and they do not guarantee that timers click at the very precise time. And even though this error delays would not compound over time, and it was a precise timer, there is no guarantee that it is completely precise, so it could have some slight delay here and there. And I have rebuilt this to audio streaming, because audio streaming is using a separate audio clock, which is usually 48 kilohertz for music. And people are very sensitive to audio delays, so that's why these devices have a separate audio clock. And now this works via audio streaming, so it uses that audio clock to schedule these beeps. And as a result, these beeps are much more precise now. As before, you can change the BPM on the fly, and it aligns with what is playing right away. You can change these subdivisions, and even if you go to 300 BPMs, it is now very precise. You can switch the sounds as well as previously. So nothing changed, just what is under the hood. Also, I'm working right now on adding the highlight for this beat, so when it plays it should highlight. But as it turned out, it's not as easy as I anticipated it to be, because synchronizing the UI with audio is actually a very common problem for video players, and not an easy problem to solve, but possible. And even if it is precise, it won't be visually precise, because usually the screens on iOS and Android devices is working in 60 frames per second, so you have 16 millisecond delay, even if maximum 16 millisecond delay, even if you schedule this animation of highlighting the beat very precisely. So sometimes it may be off by 16 milliseconds. But people are not that sensitive to visual delays as they are to audio delays. So that shouldn't be critical. Another feature here that was added is when you play with notes. Let's select a couple of notes and you want to know which scale that is. Or you can select notes like this. You can long press on the fretboard and you can select here option find scale 5 notes. This means that it will try to find every scale that has these 5 notes exactly. Or you can select 5 plus notes and it will find all the scales that have 5 or more notes. And once you do that, it opens these scales and chords, and it will show you all these scales that have these notes. And this feature just applies these filters. So these filters can be applied manually here by tapping on this button, and you have a couple of different filter options. You can select which notes you want. So all this feature does is applies filters. And once you apply these filters, they will not clear until you manually clear them. So every time you open this page, you will get this filtering. Let's actually make less notes, like this, 3 plus, and you will get all of this. And with different keys. So, for example, this could be C major scale or G major scale. So because these 3 notes are in both of them. And you can select, for example, G major scale, and it will select the key and the scale as well. There was also a change for these scale palettes, where you can now add the name. So if you added the color coding for notes or intervals and you save it, it will ask you for the name. This name is optional, you don't have to add it, but you can if you want. And if you didn't add it previously, but you want to name this scale palette, somehow you can do this by renaming here. And then you enter the name. It's just that if you have the Pro version of the app and you can add a couple of different color coding for yourself, you can name it by the use of it, so that you know which one to select for which use case. Also for the snapshot settings here, where you can pretty much whatever you do here, whatever you configured here, you can export into the picture, to the gallery app or photo app, or you can share it to other people. Now you can control where the title is going to be and how big the title is going to be, because 1 is a big title, and if you go all the way to 0.25, this is in percentage relative to the biggest title possible, the font size is going to be about this big. So now you can control that. And that is it, I guess. If you have any questions, you can ask them in the comments. You can also use report a bug or request a feature. Both of these, just open email app with my email profile so that you contact me via email. I respond quickly usually. Thank you for watching, and bye.